I woke up to the doorbell ringing like someone was trying to break it. It was 5 in the morning. I sat up slowly, blinked, and listened again. Another buzz. Then another. Then loud knocking. Someone was in a rush. Or desperate. I reached for my glasses and robe. Walked down the hall barefoot. Every step colder than the last. I peeked through the peephole and my heart didn't drop. It froze. Vanessa. Standing outside my front door in full makeup and heels, flanked by 2 men in black polos. I didn't recognize them. One held a clipboard. The other had a tape measure. Behind them, a truck. The kind movers drive. The kind you rent when you're leaving a place or cleaning it out. Next to them was Mr. Clark. My neighbor, 82. Retired firefighter. Usually calm. But his face looked off, pale, apologetic. I opened the door. Just a crack. "Mrs. Carter," he said first. Voice low. I tried to stop her. "But she says she's the new owner. That your son gave her the place. She's here to take the furniture." Vanessa didn't flinch. She smiled at me like we were old friends. Or like I was a fool who hadn't realized she'd already won. "Oh. Good morning, Helen," she said. Voice sugar-sweet. "We didn't want to bother you. But since we're married now, I figured it was time to handle the move. Dan's sleeping, but he said I could take care of it." I looked at her. Looked past her. The men were already heading toward the steps. And still I didn't raise my voice. I just opened the door all the way. Stepped aside. And said, "Come in." Vanessa blinked. Surprised. I smiled. "You're going to want to see what I've done with the place." She nodded to the movers. Heels clicking against the tile as she stepped in like she owned the floor. She didn't know it yet, but every inch of that condo was recording her. You know that feeling, the one where your mind is calm, but your body is shaking. That was me. Because 4 months earlier, I'd made a decision. And today, I would find out if it was the right one. I watched as Vanessa walked from room to room like she was inspecting a hotel suite. She pointed to the sideboard. "This can go." Then the armchair. "That, too." He said this was his favorite chair. I didn't move. "Dan's favorite chair?" I asked. She nodded. "He used to sit here before school. Back when he was a kid." I almost laughed. "Dan never sat in that chair. He hated it. Said it smelled like old people and dust. I kept it because it was the last thing his father bought before he passed. But I didn't say that. Instead, I offered her tea. She declined. That's when I knew for sure she was nervous. She wasn't here to ask for anything. She was here to take it. The movers came back in, ready to haul. That's when I stopped them. I held up my hand. "Before anyone touches anything," I said, "I need you to know this property is under legal review, and this visit, it's being recorded. In full. By multiple sources." Vanessa's smile slipped for the first time. "What are you talking about?" I pointed at the bookshelf. "It in camera," I said. Then to the hallway light fixture. Another one. Then, calmly, I opened a drawer and took out a stack of papers. Her eyes darted. She recognized the seal on the envelope. "My attorney's office." She grabbed her phone. "You're being paranoid," she said. But her voice cracked on the last word. "Maybe," I said. "Or maybe I've just learned to stop trusting people who hand me drinks I didn't ask for." That landed. Because the color drained from her face. "Dan will hear about this," she said, almost hissing. "He'll be furious." I didn't blink. I hope he does. Because for once, he'll hear the truth. Mr. Clark, still standing at the door, looked more confused than ever. The movers, they put their tools down. One of them whispered, "We're not touching anything." Vanessa's mask cracked. "Just a little. I'm the wife," she said. "You're also a suspect," I replied. Her jaw dropped. "Excuse me," I nodded. "There's a report, filed with the police. Also with Adult Protective Services." and the HOA board. You can check the timestamps. And the footage. I backed everything up. I'm not the kind of old woman people walk over. Not anymore. It was quiet for a beat too long. Then Vanessa scoffed, grabbed her purse, and stormed out, heels snapping against the tile like gunshots. The movers followed. One of them even tipped his head to me before leaving. Mr. Clark stayed behind. He looked at me like he didn't know who I was anymore. I didn't blame him. I barely recognized myself either. When the door shut behind them, I sat down in that armchair, Dan's favorite one. And for the first time in months, I let myself breathe. I knew this wasn't over, but it had started. Finally, I had drawn the line. It's strange how quickly poison can look like love. The first time I met Vanessa, she was standing in my kitchen, barefoot, flipping pancakes. Dan had brought her home for Thanksgiving weekend. No warning. No introduction. I came out of my bedroom that morning in my robe, rubbing sleep from my eyes. And there she was, humming to herself, moving like she'd lived there for years. "Good morning, Helen," she said with that soft voice. "Hope you're okay with cinnamon in your pancakes." I was too stunned to answer. Dan walked in right after, grinning like a schoolboy. She insisted on making breakfast. He said, "You've done enough cooking for a lifetime?" That part almost felt sweet. Almost. Vanessa was perfect, too perfect. She offered to clean, to run errands, even helped me trim the rose bushes out back. She brought me a different smoothie every morning. "Protein," she said, "for strong bones." She called me Mama H, said she wanted me to feel included. And for a while, I let myself believe it. I mean, after everything Dan had put me through, dropping out of school, moving back in, borrowing money, promising to pay it back, and never doing it, seeing him with a woman who actually seemed to calm him down, it felt like relief. So I smiled. I accepted her smoothies. I thanked her for her kindness. But deep down, something itched. Not a red flag, just a draft. A shift in the air I couldn't name yet. The first time I felt truly off was a Tuesday. I'd just finished folding laundry, sat down on the couch with my smoothie, and flipped on the TV. 10 minutes later, the room started spinning. My heart raced. My vision blurred. I thought I was having a stroke. But then it passed just as fast as it came. The next morning, Vanessa handed me another drink. "Strawberry banana today." She smiled. I smiled back, but I didn't drink it. I poured it down the sink the moment she left, just to see. And wouldn't you know it, I felt fine all day. That's when I started paying closer attention. Vanessa never drank the smoothies she made for me. She never tasted them. Not even a sip. She was always watching when I did. And every time I felt lightheaded, weak, foggy, it was after one of her drinks. Still, I told myself I was imagining things, that I was just tired, that maybe I was getting old. But I'm not stupid. I've lived 62 years on this earth. I raised a son by myself. I worked 3 jobs when his father died. I paid off a mortgage, fought through cancer, and kept food on the table when my own family gave up on me. I know what normal tired feels like. This wasn't that. One night, while taking out the trash, I ran into Maggie, my next-door neighbor. Retired nurse, 86, sharp as a tack. "You look pale," she said. "Your pupils are dilated." "You okay?" I told her about the dizziness, the smoothies, the odd feeling I couldn't shake. She didn't hesitate. "You need to stop drinking whatever she's giving you," Maggie said. "And you need to get your hands on one of those cups. Have it tested." That night, I hid the next day's smoothie in a freezer bag and stored it in the back of my freezer. 3 days later, I mailed it to a private lab. Paid cash. No name. Just the address. I didn't tell Dan. I didn't want to believe he knew. That he was involved. That maybe, just maybe, the son I raised was letting this woman harm me. But then came the brunch. Dan and Vanessa invited me out. Vanessa looked radiant. like she was already on a magazine cover for Perfect Wives. Just a casual family brunch, she said. At the table, between bites of avocado toast, she pulled out an envelope. I wanted to give you this, she said. It's just a little form. You know, in case something ever happens. It gives us permission to help manage your affairs. Health, bills, that kind of thing. I opened it. Durable power of attorney. Full authority. She didn't even flinch when I read it. Dan leaned in. It's just so we can take care of you. Mom, you've been so tired lately. I stared at him. Not her. Because that moment told me everything. He was in on it. Or at least willing to pretend not to see. I folded the papers, slid them back into the envelope, and handed them to Vanessa. I'll look over it later, I said, but I didn't. Instead, I took it straight to Linda Morales, my attorney. We'd met years ago through the community center when I was helping seniors apply for Medicaid. She owed me a favor. When I showed her the documents, she raised an eyebrow. Do you want to fight this now? She asked. Or do you want to let them hang themselves first? I told her the truth. I want them to try, so I can catch every move they make. We got to work that week. Installed hidden cameras. Synced them to cloud backup. Put a lock on every drawer that held my financials. Logged every dollar I'd ever given Dan, from rent to credit card bills to the car I helped him buy when he got fired. I changed the locks. Rewrote my will. Filed a complaint with Adult Protective Services under my own name, just in case. And I waited. Vanessa didn't know I'd stopped drinking her smoothies. She didn't know I had recordings of her whispering to Dan that I probably had early dementia. She didn't know I'd found the altered medical report she tried to submit through a fake email account, pretending to be my doctor. No. She just kept smiling, kept walking around the condo like it already had her name on it. And I let her. Because now I wasn't confused anymore. I was watching. Maggie always had good instincts. The kind of woman who could tell if something was off before the rest of the room even noticed. She'd been a nurse for 40 years. Raised 5 kids. And lost her husband to pancreatic cancer. Nothing rattled her. Nothing slipped past her. So when she leaned in one morning and said, "You need a lawyer. And not tomorrow, today," I didn't argue. I called Linda Morales that afternoon. Linda wasn't flashy. No big desk or fancy suit. She worked out of a small office behind a bakery and drank coffee like it was keeping her alive. But what she had was bite. She read Vanessa's forged documents with a poker face. Didn't flinch when I told her about the smoothies. Didn't roll her eyes when I played her the first audio clip from the hallway camera. Instead, she just said, "We let them walk into the trap themselves." I nodded, and for the first time in weeks, I felt steady. We started with the obvious. Linda helped me request a formal mental competency evaluation by a real doctor, not the online therapist Vanessa had tried to pass off with a Gmail address and a cheap logo. The results were clear. I was sound, healthy, a little tired. Sure, but not even close to impaired. We had it notarized, certified. Filed it with the clerk of court, just in case. Then we went deeper. I gave Linda a full timeline. Every smoothie, every didsy spell, every comment Vanessa had made when she thought I wasn't listening, every dollar I'd spent on Dan. It added up fast. Back rent, $6,000. Student loans I co-signed and ended up paying myself $22,000. The used car he just needed for work, $11,500. Add in credit cards, medical bills, food, and his part of the utilities, and the total, a little over $110,000 in 6 years. Linda wrote it down without blinking. "They're not just trying to steal from you," she said. "They've been bleeding you dry for years." I started to see it differently after that. It wasn't just Vanessa. Dan was in it too. Maybe not the mastermind, but certainly the willing partner. He had watched me lose weight, watched me stumble in the hallway, watched his new wife hand me drinks I never asked for, and smiled while I drank them. He didn't protect me. He didn't stop her. He helped her. The worst part, I could remember the exact day it started. Last December, just before Christmas. I gave Dan a check $2,000 to help him and Vanessa with holiday bills. He said he'd pay me back in January. He never did. But 2 days later, he showed up with Vanessa, carrying a brand new flat-screen TV. It was a gift from her brother, he said. Her brother who, apparently, didn't exist. That was the moment I stopped being a mother and started being a mark. And I knew. It was my job to end it. With Linda's help, I installed a second layer of cameras. One in the hallway light. One in a photo frame above the fireplace. I added a doorbell cam with audio and night vision. Everything synced to cloud storage. Backed up in real time. I made copies of every bank transaction. Pulled Vanessa's public records. Filed a confidential report with Adult Protective Services for financial coercion and suspected drugging. I also left one of the smoothie cups in the fridge. Just one. Right at the front. A decoy. I wanted her to think I was still playing the role. Still the tired, confused old woman who needed help remembering her own name. Still the easy target. Then I waited. And they didn't disappoint. Late one night, 2 weeks after our family brunch, I caught Vanessa on camera in my bedroom. Dan had told me she was out with friends, that she wouldn't be over. But there she was, rifling through my dresser drawers, holding up my medical folder to the light, taking photos of documents she didn't recognize. She didn't even know she was looking straight into a camera lens disguised as a vintage lamp. When I showed the footage to Linda, she let out a low whistle. Game over, she said. We just need one more push. One mistake from them. And, as if on cue, the mistake came. It was a Sunday morning. Vanessa showed up at my place alone. I opened the door. Pretending I didn't know she was coming. She smiled. Handed me a coffee from my favorite shop. Almond milk latte, she said. Just like you like it. I held it. Didn't drink. She sat down on my couch like it was hers. Crossed her legs. Looked around slowly. Then she said something I'll never forget. You know, Helen, if anything ever happens to you, Dan and I will take good care of this place. It's a big responsibility, but we're ready. I looked at her. Really looked. She wasn't nervous anymore. She thought she'd won. She thought I was already fading. She didn't know the real game had just begun. People think betrayal feels like a knife, but it's quieter than that. It's a smile with a lie under it. A handshake hiding a trap. A form slid across the table with just enough kindness to make you hesitate. And that's exactly how Vanessa handed me the papers. It was a family brunch. That's what she called it in the group text. She even used a heart emoji. We just want to celebrate how close we've all become. She wrote, Dan and I have a little surprise. I almost didn't go. But Linda said, go? Let them believe you're still asleep. That's when people show their real selves. So I went. I wore my nicest sweater, put on lipstick, even brought homemade banana bread. I wanted to look like a woman with nothing to hide and nothing to fear. The brunch was at their apartment. 3rd floor. Balcony view. Vanessa had outdone herself. Flowers. Champagne. Jazz playing softly from a Bluetooth speaker. I walked in. And the way she greeted me, arms wide. Voice sugary, anyone else would have thought we were best friends. But I saw the tightness around her eyes. She was playing a part, and she thought I still was too. Dan kissed my cheek. Glad you came. Mom, I said. Of course, and I meant it. Because today, I was going to watch them dig their own grave. Halfway through the meal, just as Vanessa was pouring more mimosas, she reached into her purse and pulled out a crisp white envelope. I knew what it was before she opened her mouth. I've been working on some legal stuff, she said. Just in case anything ever happens. Nothing urgent, just paperwork. She slid the envelope across the table, smiling like it was a birthday card. It's a co-ownership agreement, she said. Dan and I just thought it would help you rest easier. Knowing your affairs are taken care of, Dan added. We just want to help. Mom, you've been forgetful lately. There it was. The word, forgetful. I almost laughed. They'd rehearsed this. I picked up the envelope, held it gently, didn't open it. I looked Vanessa in the eye, then Dan, and said, Why don't we go over it together right now? Vanessa blinked. Dan shifted in his seat. She said, Oh, you don't have to. We can explain later. No, I interrupted. Let's do it now. It'll only take a minute. I opened the envelope slowly, pulled out the paperwork, and laid it flat on the table. Everything was exactly what Linda had predicted. If I'd signed those pages, I would have given them power of attorney, access to all my accounts, and co-ownership of my condo immediately, not just in the event of illness. It was a transfer, not a protection. A heist disguised as concern. I looked down at the lines where they'd left space for my signature. Then I picked up the pen Vanessa had placed right next to the napkins. Almost reflexively, like she thought I wouldn't notice the setup, I uncapped it, paused, and smiled. You know, I said, this is really thoughtful. Vanessa's shoulders dropped an inch. Relief. Dan nodded. We just want what's best for you. I nodded, too. Then I reached into my purse and pulled out a second envelope. Vanessa's smile froze. What's that? She asked. I slid it across the table, exactly the way she had done. Just something small, from my lawyer. Dan stiffened. Vanessa didn't touch it. She just stared. I leaned forward. Before I sign anything, I said, I think you should know what's already on file with the county clerk. You might find the dates interesting. Vanessa didn't move. Dan reached for the envelope with slow fingers, opened it. Read. And as the blood drained from his face, I watched the shift. Fear replacing confidence. Panic stealing control. He looked at me. You filed a protection order. I filed a lot of things. I said, the cameras. I added, the tests, the audio files, the emails from your fake doctor. Vanessa, all of it. Vanessa's voice cracked. You're paranoid. No, I said calmly. I was careful. There's a difference. The room went still. You could hear the sound of a fork being set down in the kitchen. No one spoke. Then, softly, I said, you wanted me to sign away everything I worked for. My home, my rights, my freedom. But what I signed instead was a paper trail. And it all leads to you. Vanessa stood up so fast her chair nearly fell backward. She grabbed her bag, eyes wild, voice rising. You're going to regret this. Dan tried to say something, anything, but all that came out was a whisper. Mom. I didn't flinch. I stood up, gathered my things, and said one last thing before walking out. I'm not your mother today. I'm the woman you underestimated. Outside. The air was cool. The sun had shifted. And for the first time in months, I felt taller, stronger, lighter. Because they thought they had me, they thought I'd fold. But instead, I handed them the truth. And the truth, unlike their lies, had weight. 3 nights after the brunch, I couldn't sleep. I lay there with my eyes open, staring at the ceiling fan, spinning slowly overhead, listening for footsteps, not just outside, inside. Something in me had shifted after I confronted them. I wasn't scared anymore, but I wasn't relaxed either. I was ready. Because when people like Vanessa don't get what they want politely, they come back louder, sharper, meaner, and deep down. I knew she was coming. I didn't have to wait long. It was a Thursday. The house was quiet. Too quiet. My phone buzzed at 9:03 p.m. Motion detected front door. I tapped the camera app. And there she was. Vanessa. In black leggings and a gray hoodie. Hair in a tight bun. No smile this time. No heels. No brunch makeup. Just her and someone I didn't recognize. A man. Mid-30s. Wearing gloves. Holding what looked like a crowbar. I didn't panic. I didn't move. I watched. The man rang the bell twice. Glanced around. Then stepped back. Vanessa pulled something from her coat pocket. A key. My old spare. She thought I hadn't changed the locks. She thought wrong. She tried once. Then again. The key didn't work. She cursed. Then nodded to the man. And just like that, he stepped forward and started picking the lock. I'd already called the police before they even got through the door. It was set on speed dial. Linda's advice. If they ever try something physical, don't engage. Call first. Let them build the case for you. So I did. Then I sat in the dark, just behind the kitchen wall, watching my security feed live on my iPad. The moment the door cracked open, the hallway camera lit up. Facial recognition kicked in. Vanessa. Unknown male. Unauthorized entry. Everything recorded. Everything time-stamped. They stepped in like burglars who thought the house was empty. But I was there. Every second of it. I heard her whisper. Grab the safe first. It's in the bedroom closet. He nodded. She added. Take the folders in the drawer. Bank stuff. Medical stuff. I don't care, just take it. They didn't know I'd replaced the safe. They didn't know there were no original documents in the house. They didn't know every camera was streaming in real time to the police. They were too busy stealing what wasn't even real anymore. Props I had left for them. Just like I'd planned. And still, I waited. I wanted the cops to catch them in the act. Not outside. Inside. I waited until they reached the hallway. That's when I stepped out from behind the kitchen wall and flipped on the lights. Vanessa froze. The man dropped the crowbar with a clatter. She stared at me like I was a ghost. I said one word. Smile. Because she was right under the frame of the living room camera. I wanted her face in full HD. She opened her mouth, but no sound came out. Then came the sirens. Fast. Close. They didn't have time to run. 3 police officers swarmed the front porch in less than a minute. One pointed his flashlight at the man. Hands where I can see them. Another grabbed Vanessa by the wrist and turned her around. She screamed. Not in fear, but rage. You set me up? I didn't answer. Because she wasn't wrong. I did set her up. But only after she tried to erase me. As the officers led them outside, I saw Dan standing across the street. Hands in his pockets. Frozen. He didn't run. Didn't shout. Didn't even blink. Just watched as his wife got shoved into the back of a police car. And when they drove away, he turned. And walked back to his own car. Didn't look at me once. The police took my statement calmly. They already had the footage. The files. The timeline. The reports. They said I'd done everything right. Then they asked if I wanted a restraining order. I said yes. And I added one more name to it. Dan's. Not because I thought he'd break in, but because I needed the line between us to be clear. Legal. Uncrossable. Back inside. The house was quiet again. The lock was cracked. The carpet muddy with boot prints. One chair knocked over. But I'd never felt more secure. Because now, the truth wasn't just mine. It was public. It was documented. And soon, it would be judged. In court. On paper. By people who knew what justice looked like. Later that night, I sat in the armchair, the one Vanessa said was Dan's favorite. And I let myself cry. Not because I was scared, but because the part of me that still wanted to be loved, the part that still remembered Dan as a little boy with scraped knees and a stutter, she finally gave up. She let go. And it hurt, but it also healed. Because now there was nothing left to lose, and everything left to take back. After the break-in, things went quiet. Too quiet. Vanessa was arrested. The man with her so-called moving assistant, turned out to be her ex-boyfriend. He confessed fast. Said she told him the house was hers. That I was senile and under care. He said he thought they were just helping an old lady move some stuff. But the moment he saw the cameras, He knew he'd been used. They both had. Dan didn't call me, didn't text, didn't show up, just vanished. And I let him. I had nothing left to explain and nothing left to give. The state filed charges. Breaking and entering, attempted theft, fraud. Vanessa made bail within 48 hours. Her family must have pooled something together. But she didn't come near me. She couldn't. The restraining order saw to that. Still, I could feel her in the air, like a storm circling just out of sight. Then came the envelope. No return address. Just my name. Inside, one photograph and a single piece of paper. The photo was of Dan and Vanessa. In Vegas, smiling, standing in front of a neon-lit wedding chapel. She was in white. He was in a suit. They looked like strangers wearing my son's face. The paper, a copy of a marriage certificate, filed and dated 1 week before the brunch. Before the fake contract. Before the break-in, they had tied the knot in secret. And then walked into my life like it was theirs. It wasn't the marriage that broke me. It was the intent. They didn't invite me. Didn't even mention it. Just got married. Then started the process of erasing me. First emotionally, then legally. I stared at the photo until my hands shook. Then I burned it. Linda was furious. "This isn't just manipulation," she said. "It's a setup." They were building a narrative. Married. Responsible. Taking care of Mom, so if anything happened to you, they'd already look like the good guys. She was right. It was all strategy. The wedding. The brunch. The fake signatures. The break-in. A series of moves designed to paint me unstable and them as the heroes. But the thing about building a paper trail, if you fake enough pages, someone's going to read the fine print. And we had enough proof now to blow every one of their lies apart. Linda filed a motion to subpoena Vanessa's bank records. Guess what showed up? A string of wire transfers just under reporting thresholds, moving from Dan's old accounts to a shell company registered in Vanessa's maiden name. The same shell company that had submitted the fake medical documents. The same one that had received deposits labeled caregiving support from my son's credit union account. They weren't just trying to manipulate me emotionally. They were laundering the story, making it look like they'd been supporting me, that I was dependent on them, that they were acting out of love and legal duty, when in reality they were getting paid to destroy me. Linda built a case file the size of a phone book. Every receipt, every message, every forged document. The timeline was crystal clear. And the motive, even clearer. Control. Of my money, my property, my legacy. And they almost had it. If I had signed one piece of paper, drunk one more smoothie, missed one red flag, I'd be gone, tucked away in a facility. Or worse, left to spiral while they sold off my life one drawer at a time. That was the hardest part. Not the betrayal. Not even the lies. It was how close they came. How easy it would have been to just let go. To believe the version of me they kept pushing. Forgetful. Fragile. Finished. But I didn't. I held the line. And now, it was their turn to explain. The judge set a hearing. Vanessa's lawyer tried to delay, saying she was emotionally distressed. The irony wasn't lost on anyone. But the motion was denied. She was ordered to appear. And so was Dan. The night before the hearing, I sat in my living room. Lights low, TV off, replaying every memory I had of my son. The first time he said, "Mom," the Halloween we made costumes from old pillowcases. The night he called me from a payphone in college, crying because he failed his math final. I answered every call, gave every dollar, showed up every time, and still he chose her. Over me. That was the moment the grief finally cleared. Not replaced by anger, but clarity. Dan wasn't the boy I raised anymore, and I wasn't the woman they thought they could bury. So I got my outfit ready, pressed my best blazer, charged my phone, and packed every single file into a navy blue briefcase that had belonged to my husband. I wasn't just walking into court. I was walking into the truth. And this time, they wouldn't be able to talk over me. The thing about snakes is, even after you cut the head off, the body still tries to move. It was barely a week before the hearing. I was watering my succulents, standing in the front window in a cotton house dress, trying to pretend things were normal. The house was still. My nerves weren't. And then I saw it. A white rental truck, parking slow across the street. 2 men stepped out. They weren't from the neighborhood. One pulled out a clipboard. The other popped the back door open, revealing moving blankets and straps. I knew that truck. Not the license plate. Not the company name. The pattern. The timing. The setup. Vanessa's last trick. I walked out the front door before they even reached the driveway. "Can I help you?" I asked. Calm as ice. The taller one glanced at his paper. "We're here for the pickup. Scheduled for today. Furniture removal from this address." "No." I said. "You're not." He blinked. "But this is the address on file. I don't care what's on file." I said. "Voice firm now. This is my home. And no one scheduled anything with me." He looked nervous. "You'll need to talk to the client who booked it," I added. His partner chimed in. "We've got an invoice. Says everything here belongs to the client. Woman named Vanessa L. That's enough." I cut in. "You're being recorded. And unless you want to be part of a felony, I suggest you back off this property." They hesitated. I pointed to the doorbell cam. Then the 2 visible cameras mounted above the garage. This house is under surveillance, and this incident has already been reported. I hadn't called the cops yet, but I didn't need to. Because Maggie, bless her soul, was already on her porch cell phone to her ear. That was the thing about being underestimated. People forget who's watching. The truck pulled off 10 minutes later, slowly. No furniture loaded, no apology given, and I stood there the whole time, arms crossed, not moving an inch, because that was what Vanessa needed to see. The camera footage. Me standing, not afraid, still here, still in control. When the officers arrived, I gave them the recording, the timestamps, the clipboard that one of the movers accidentally left behind in the rush. The officer looked at it, then at me. They claimed this was a legal repossession. He said, "But this isn't even an official order. It's a bluff." I told him, "And it won't be the last." He nodded. But the truth was, I hoped it would be. I wanted it to be over. But I knew better. That night, I sat at my kitchen table staring at the contract Vanessa had forged months earlier. The one she tried to get me to sign. The same one I'd turned into the judge. I highlighted every fake signature, every altered line. Then I opened my laptop and started drafting a letter to the judge. A supplemental statement, detailing the pattern, the manipulation, the harassment, the fear. I told myself I was just covering every base. But if I'm honest, I was preparing for war. Because this wasn't about stuff anymore. This was about control. And Vanessa couldn't stand the fact that I still had mine. The next morning, I got a knock at the door. It was Dan. Not with flowers. Not with an apology. Just standing there. Arms limp at his sides, like someone told him to show up and he obeyed. I didn't invite him in. I didn't say anything. He cleared his throat. "She's really upset." "Is that right?" I said. "She said you lied, that you planned this." I looked him dead in the eyes. And what do you think he didn't answer? Because he didn't come to talk. He came to scout, to test the water, to see if maybe, just maybe, he could soften me up, buy a little wiggle room before court. I leaned against the doorframe. "You know, Dan," I said, "when you were 10, you stole $10 from my purse." I didn't get mad. I didn't yell. I just waited. And you came to me crying, saying you didn't know why you did it. He looked down. "I forgave you then." I said, "Because you were a child." I let that sit for a second, then added, "You're not a child anymore, and I don't owe you anything." He opened his mouth. closed it, and left. The court date was in 2 days, and I could feel the storm tightening, but I wasn't afraid. I was prepared. The difference this time, I wasn't waiting to be rescued. I was the rescue. For myself, you'd think watching someone get arrested would feel dramatic, loud, chaotic. But when it's personal, it's quiet. Like air being sucked out of a room, like the silence before a storm hits, like a truth finally spoken out loud. The hearing was scheduled for Friday morning. I was dressed and ready by 6. Navy suit, pearl earrings, hair done, documents packed. I didn't want to look put together. I was put together, not just for the court, but for me, because this time, I wasn't walking in hoping to be believed. I was walking in knowing I couldn't be ignored. The courthouse wasn't crowded, just a few people waiting for traffic tickets, a couple of lawyers murmuring near the vending machines. But in that small civil courtroom, room 4B, everything I'd carried for months was about to land. Vanessa walked in 5 minutes before the session started. Tight dress, designer bag, that same cold composure. She scanned the room like it belonged to her. Didn't even look at me. Dan followed 2 steps behind. Jaw tight. Suit too big. When he finally saw me, he blinked. But didn't wave. Didn't nod. Nothing. We weren't mother and son anymore. We were 2 opposing parties. The judge entered. Gray suit. Clear voice. No nonsense. He called the case. Read the list of filings. Then turned to me. Ms. and Carter. You may proceed. Linda stood. She didn't yell. Didn't dramatize. She just laid out the facts. The fake documents. The unauthorized attempts to gain control of my estate. The forged signatures. The unauthorized surveillance claims Vanessa tried to make, only to be disproven by our time-stamped security logs. She showed the court the medical report, the handwriting inconsistencies, the money trail, the emails, the recorded footage. Vanessa didn't flinch. Not even when Linda played the clip of her saying, "If anything happens to Helen, this place is ours." Not even when the court clerk projected the moving truck invoice on the screen. But Dan did. His face cracked. He kept glancing at her like maybe, just maybe, he'd misunderstood the depth of what they'd done. Then it was Vanessa's turn. Her attorney stood. Young. Nervous. Not ready for war. He tried to claim concern. That they were just trying to help an elderly woman manage her affairs. He said they acted out of love. That they were misinterpreted. Then he handed the judge a copy of the marriage certificate, trying to lean on the family caretaker defense. But it was too late, because truth, when laid out cleanly, is hard to outrun. And when the judge asked Vanessa directly, "Did you attempt to access Ms. Carter's home without her knowledge or consent?" she said, "It was a misunderstanding." When he asked again, "Were you present during an unauthorized entry?" Documented on video. "With intent to remove property not legally yours," she paused. Then said, "I was trying to help. She's not well." And that's when I stood. Because I'd had enough. "Your Honor," I said, voice clear. "I've spent my whole life being well. Raising a son alone. Working jobs that broke my back and still showing up for everyone. This woman didn't help me. She drugged me. She tried to erase me. And when kindness didn't get her what she wanted, she came with force." The courtroom was still. I wasn't shaking. I wasn't crying. I was just done. The judge nodded, sat back in his chair, then said the words I never expected to hear so soon. "Based on the evidence and sworn testimony, I'm authorizing immediate temporary protective custody. Bailiff detain the defendant." It didn't happen like the movies. No dramatic shouting. No collapse. Just motion. Swift. Surgical. The bailiff stood behind Vanessa, said her name calmly. When she turned, he asked her to place her hands behind her back. She froze, looked at Dan, and for the first time I saw something on her face that looked like fear. The cuffs clicked once, twice. No fight. No plea. Just silence. Dan's mouth opened. But nothing came out. He just stared as his wife, his partner in all of it, was led out of the courtroom. Her heels echoed all the way down the hall. And then she was gone. The judge turned to me, said he would be recommending full guardianship restrictions against Vanessa, said I had handled myself with grace and clarity. I thanked him. But the truth, it wasn't grace. It was survival. Outside. The sky looked bluer than usual. Not bright. Not soft. Just open. Dan followed me out. He didn't say my name. Didn't ask for forgiveness. Just stood there. Finally said, "You didn't have to do all this." I looked at him. "Neither did you." I said, and walked away. That night, back in my living room, the one they tried to take, I sat with a cup of tea and looked out the window. Same house, same view, but nothing about me was the same. Because I didn't just watch her get cuffed. I watched myself take my power back, and I'm never handing it over again. The day after court, I woke up at 5 a.m. No alarm, no stress, just awake. And for the first time in what felt like years, the silence didn't scare me. It filled the house like light, soft, solid, mine. I made coffee. No rush. No need to second guess what was in it. Then I stepped outside onto the porch with my robe wrapped tight and felt the chill of morning cut across my skin. It was real. I was real. And nothing in my bloodstream was making me question that. The papers came through 2 days later. The judge's ruling. Protective order extended. Fraud charges referred to the DA. Medical records cleared. My rights, property, and identity legally restored and protected. I held the envelope in my hands for a long time before opening it. Not because I was nervous, but because I didn't need to read the words to believe them anymore. I already knew. They didn't win. And they never would. I sat down that afternoon with Maggie. She brought over a lemon pie, just like she used to when my husband was alive. We didn't talk much. We didn't have to. She just patted my hand and said, "You look taller." I smiled. Because I felt it. But freedom, even after victory, is complicated. Because when the storm ends, you're left standing in the wreckage of what used to be your life. And for me, that wreckage had a name. Dan. There was no apology. No letter. No voicemail. Just absence. An empty space where my son used to be. And, in a way, that hurt more than anything Vanessa ever did. Because I could fight her. But him, I had to let him go. I boxed up the old photos. Not out of bitterness, but because they were chapters that no longer needed to be read every day. They still mattered. They just didn't define me anymore. Then, I did something that scared me more than the hearing ever did. I booked a one-way ticket. Santa Fe. I'd always wanted to go. But between work, raising Dan, paying bills, and surviving, I never let myself. Now, there was no one left to ask permission from. No one to lie to. No one to fear. Just me. I left the house in Maggie's care. Told her she could water the plants and sleep in the guest room if she wanted. She hugged me so tight I thought I'd break. "You deserve a soft life," she whispered. And I finally believed her. New Mexico was dry and golden and quiet in a way that healed something deep in me. I didn't make an itinerary. I didn't have a plan. I just walked. Through markets. Through old adobe streets. Through trails where the sky stretched out like a promise. I sat in cafes with a book and no one waiting on me. And one afternoon, I found a little gallery tucked between two stone buildings. Inside, a woman named Carla was painting by the window. She didn't ask where I came from. She asked what I loved. I told her I didn't know yet. She handed me a brush. That's how it started. Not with a grand plan, but with color, with silence, with my own hands. I painted every afternoon that week. Badly at first. Then better. Then with something that felt like breath. Carla said, "You've got something." I said, I'm just figuring out who I am." And she smiled. That's what art is. I stayed longer than I meant to. Then I stayed longer than I needed to. Then I stopped counting the days altogether. One night, I sat alone on a bench as the sun dipped low behind the hills, and I thought about the woman I used to be. The one who made excuses for a grown man who called her mom but treated her like a wallet. The one who smiled through gaslighting? Who doubted her own memory because a younger voice told her to? The one who drank what she was handed? Who kept quiet to keep the peace? I missed her, but I couldn't take her with me, because she belonged to the life they tried to trap me in. And I wasn't living there anymore, so I let her go. Not with bitterness, not with shame, but like you'd let go of an old coat you loved once but doesn't fit now. Too heavy, too worn, too tied to someone else's weather. I buried the old me that night. Not in a grave, but in a promise that I would never again shrink to fit inside someone else's comfort. I was 62, widowed, alone, and freer than I had ever been. The message came on a Tuesday. I was in a little ceramic studio off Canyon Road, palms dusted with clay, trying to shape something that looked like a bowl but refused to listen. The text buzzed in slow. No name on the screen. Just a number I didn't recognize. "Hi, Helen. I just wanted to say I'm sorry. I made mistakes. I hope one day you'll understand." It took me a full minute before I realized who it was. Vanessa. No greeting. No explanation. Just a vague attempt at repair, like all of it could be brushed away in 20 words or less. I didn't respond, not out of anger, but because there was nothing left to say. Some people believe closure comes with confrontation, but sometimes the cleanest closure is no reply at all. Later that day, Dan called. The first time since the hearing, I stared at the screen. My son's name, my son's voice waiting on the other end, but I didn't answer. Not out of spite, but because I'd already buried that version of him, along with the part of me that kept hoping he'd turn around. He left a voicemail. It was short. Just said, "I don't know how we got here. I miss you. I really do." I listened once, then deleted it. Grief is strange. It doesn't always roar. Sometimes it sits quietly on your chest while you sip your coffee, reminding you that not all wounds close clean. And that's okay, because survival isn't about being unscarred. It's about choosing not to bleed for people who cut you on purpose. In Santa Fe, I started selling my art. First at local pop-ups, then in a corner of Carla's gallery. Tourists liked my color work. Locals said they felt something in the brushstrokes. I told them I didn't paint for beauty. I painted for truth. That seemed to be enough. I started teaching a class twice a week. Mostly older women. Divorced. Widowed. Some just tired of being invisible. They came to learn technique. Sure. But what we really did was tell the truth with our hands. Stories poured out in silence. Pain turned into glaze. Regret shaped into sculpture. And when the kiln cooled, something new always emerged. Something whole. One afternoon, a woman named Teresa lingered after class. She was soft-spoken, wore long sleeves even in heat. She asked how I knew when it was time to walk away from people who said they loved you but only showed it when it suited them. I looked at her and said, "You don't wait for a fire to burn down the house. You leave when you smell the smoke, whether they believe it's real or not." She nodded, and I knew she understood. Back home, I found a letter waiting at the post office. No return address again, but I recognized the handwriting this time. Dan. Inside. Just one page. Folded twice. "Mom, I'm in therapy. I've left Vanessa. I don't expect forgiveness. I just want you to know I'm trying to be someone better. I hope you're okay. Love. Dan." It was honest. Or at least it sounded like it. But healing had taught me something important. Honesty doesn't obligate access. Someone can grow without growing back into your life. Someone can be sorry and still not be safe. I folded the letter back up and placed it in a box with other things I no longer carried but chose not to burn. And then I went for a walk. The sun was low. Sky bruised with orange and lavender. I didn't cry. Didn't feel pulled in two. I just breathed and let it all be what it was. People say starting over is brave, but what I've learned is staying the same when you know better is cowardice. And I was never a coward. I just forgot how strong I was for a while. Back at the house, I lit a candle and sat with a glass of tea. The phone buzzed again. Another number. Another attempt? I turned it off. Because peace isn't something you wait for. It's something you guard. I'm 63 now. I live in a house filled with light. The walls are covered in art made by hands that used to tremble. I teach. I laugh. I sleep through the night. And most importantly, I am no longer waiting for anyone to love me the way I now love myself. This isn't a story about revenge. It's not even a story about loss. It's a story about returning to your own voice, to your own mind, to the version of yourself that no one gets to rewrite. Vanessa tried to erase me. Dan let her. But I walked out of that fire with my name intact. And that was always enough. Some stories don't end with fireworks. They end with quiet rooms, steady hands, and the kind of peace you have to earn. If any part of this felt familiar, if you've ever doubted your own memory, questioned your worth, or stayed silent to keep the peace, just know you're not the only one. It took me years to realize that love isn't supposed to come with conditions. And healing, it's not always loud. Sometimes, it's a woman in her 60s, learning to start again with clay under her nails and her name still hers. So if you're out there, listening, nodding, remembering I see you, and maybe now, you see yourself a little more clearly too. Thanks for sitting with me through this. Let's keep breathing. Let's keep choosing ourselves. Quietly. Firmly. Finally,